Ethan Ward, a U.S. Army veteran, was driving back to his mountain cabin in Montana just before a blizzard rolled in. He thought it was just another quiet evening, until his German Shepherd Rex started barking wildly at something ahead on the frozen road. Through the swirling snow, Ethan saw a wrecked white car and a young bride sitting motionless in a broken wheelchair beside it. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, don't call them. Just let me go." But as the storm closed in, Ethan soon realized that what she was running from was far more dangerous than the weather itself. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The first snow of winter came heavy that evening, thick flakes falling over the jagged ridges of Montana. The wind pressed against the mountains like a restless beast, howling through pine and stone. On a narrow forest road, a truck cut through the white blur, its headlights slicing a path into the storm. Behind the wheel sat Ethan Ward, 35, a U.S. Army veteran who had traded the desert's heat for the silence of snow. His face bore the marks of both: sun-browned skin, the faint lines of fatigue etched around his eyes, and a thin scar cutting across his jaw like a memory that never faded. He'd spent the last 3 years alone in a cabin near the edge of Pine Ridge Valley, building furniture for whoever still remembered his name. Solitude had become his routine, easier than explaining why he still woke at 3 a.m. from dreams of sand and fire. His only companion, Rex, a 7-year-old German Shepherd with a sable coat and intelligent amber eyes, lay quietly in the passenger seat. The dog had once been a military canine trained for detection and survival. Now he was simply Ethan's shadow, steady, loyal, and wordless. The blizzard was worsening. Snow blurred the horizon until the world became only 2 colors, white and gray. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, scanning for the faint outline of the bridge ahead. That was when he saw it, the twisted glint of metal half buried in a drift. He braked hard, the truck fishtailing before stopping sideways across the road. A car lay crumpled against the guardrail, its front hood bent like a crushed can. Through the fogged glass, a figure slumped over the steering wheel. Ethan's training took over. He grabbed his flashlight and moved toward the wreck, Rex at his heel, ears flat against the wind. "Stay," Ethan ordered softly, and the dog sat, watchful. Inside he found a woman. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue, hair dark and tangled around her face. She couldn't have been more than 30. A white dress, a wedding dress, clung to her shoulders, torn and soaked. The seat beside her was empty except for a small wheelchair, one wheel bent out of shape. Ethan's gut tightened. He reached in, checked for a pulse. Faint, but there. "Hey," he said firmly, tapping her cheek. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. A whisper escaped her lips, barely audible. "Don't call them." Her voice cracked, fragile, like glass in winter. Ethan pulled his jacket off and wrapped it around her. "We need to get you warm," he said. She didn't resist, just stared past him, unfocused, like someone who'd seen too much. He lifted her carefully from the wreck, muscles straining as he carried her through the wind. She was lighter than he expected, bones and silk. Rex trotted beside him, whining softly. Ethan opened the truck's back door and laid her across the seat, covering her with his blanket. The drive back to the cabin was slow, the storm erasing his tracks as quickly as they were made. When he finally reached the clearing, he parked near the porch and carried her inside. The cabin glowed dimly from a single oil lamp. Wooden walls, stone hearth, the scent of pine resin, home, or as close as he'd ever have. He laid her on the couch near the fire, rubbing her arms through the thick fabric of his jacket. Rex curled nearby, head resting on his paws, but eyes fixed on her. Ethan tossed more logs into the stove until the room blazed with heat. Then he found a kettle, boiled water, and mixed instant coffee. She stirred, groaning faintly. Her lashes fluttered open, revealing gray-blue eyes, striking even under the haze of exhaustion. She tried to sit up, but winced as pain shot through her shoulder. Where am I?" "Safe," Ethan said. "You were in an accident. The road's closed off." She looked around, confusion flickering across her face. The dress, the snow on her hair, the ruined car, all of it must have come back in a rush. Her voice trembled. "My name's Charlotte." She hesitated before adding, "Charlotte Winslow." Ethan nodded once. "Ethan Ward." She glanced toward the wheelchair, propped against the wall. "You brought that too?" "Wasn't sure if you needed it." Her eyes softened, and for the first time she seemed present. "Thank you." Ethan shrugged. "Would have been a waste leaving you there." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink, you're freezing." She wrapped her fingers around it, the warmth trembling through her. For a while, neither spoke. Only the hiss of snow against the window and the pop of the fire filled the silence. After a few minutes, she whispered, "Please, don't call anyone. Not yet." Ethan studied her, the soldier in him noting every detail, the uneven breathing, the darting eyes, the way her hand tightened around the cup. "Someone might be looking for you." She shook her head. "I don't want them to find me, not tonight." He didn't push. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't his business, not yet. He stood and checked the radio on the shelf. Static. No signal in the storm. "You can stay here until the weather clears," he said. "Tomorrow we'll see about getting your car towed." Charlotte nodded faintly, her voice almost a whisper. "You live out here alone?" Ethan gave a short, humorless smile. "Me and Rex. He's the better company anyway." At the sound of his name, Rex perked up and walked over, sniffing her hand before resting his head on her knee. The gesture drew a small, weary smile from her. "Seems he disagrees," she said softly. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "He's got poor judgment sometimes." Charlotte's eyes drifted to the fire. The flames reflected in them, small and unsteady. "Thank you," she murmured, "for stopping." Ethan looked at her for a moment and the bruises on her temple, the torn lace at her wrist, the exhaustion behind her words. Then he said quietly, "Storm like this? Anyone would have done the same." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Most people would have kept driving. When she finally fell asleep, Ethan sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines, erasing all sound but the storm. He glanced toward the couch, the stranger in a ruined wedding dress, sleeping beneath his army jacket, and felt something stir in the quiet space between them, something he hadn't felt in years. Not love, not yet, just the faint, unfamiliar warmth of purpose. He reached down, resting a hand on Rex's head. "We found another lost soul, buddy," he murmured. Rex blinked, ears twitching toward the window where the snow kept falling. Ethan sighed, leaning back. "Let's hope this one makes it till morning." Morning came as a pale whisper behind the snow. The storm had not ended, only softened, a quieter kind of chaos, where the world seemed half asleep beneath its white weight. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low but steady, the only movement in a still world. Ethan Ward stirred first, accustomed to the discipline of soldiers and solitude. He brewed coffee in an old percolator, its metal hiss echoing softly against the wooden walls. The air smelled of pine, smoke, and the faint trace of wet wool. Rex, his 7-year-old German shepherd, lifted his head from the rug, eyes following Ethan's every move, tail brushing once across the floor before settling again. On the couch, Charlotte Winslow slept fitfully beneath Ethan's army jacket, her wedding dress now folded beside the fire, still damp at the hem. The dress, white silk laced with dirt, looked out of place here, like a ghost misplaced in a cabin built for survival. When she finally stirred, the morning light caught her face, delicate, pale, but not fragile. The faint scar along her left collarbone spoke of an old accident. And beneath the weariness in her eyes, there was something unbroken, the quiet defiance of someone who had endured more than she would ever say aloud. Ethan turned when she sat up. "Coffee's ready," he said. His voice was steady, low, more habit than warmth. Charlotte blinked, disoriented for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." He handed her a mug, steam rising between them. "How's your shoulder?" "It hurts," she admitted, then gave a faint smile. "But I've had worse." He looked at her briefly, then away. "You said not to call anyone." She hesitated, tracing her thumb along the rim of the mug. "I meant it." Ethan didn't push. He'd learned in the Army that some truths couldn't be dragged out. They had to be waited for. "Storm's still blocking the road," he said instead. "You'll have to stay until it clears." She gave a soft, nervous laugh. "So, I'm your hostage now?" "Guest," he corrected. "The difference is you get coffee." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, wind brushed against the window like a slow breath. Charlotte watched Rex rise and stretch, his claws clicking lightly on the wooden floor before he came to rest near her feet. "He's beautiful," she said quietly. Ethan's expression softened, the first shift in his face since she'd met him. "Found him overseas," he said. "He was a canine, smartest damn partner I ever had." Charlotte bent down and scratched behind Rex's ears. The dog leaned into her touch, his tail thumping faintly. "And now he's retired?" Ethan's mouth twitched. "We both are." For a while they just sat there, a soldier, a runaway bride, and a dog who seemed wiser than both. Later that day, as the wind howled again, Ethan brought in more firewood. Charlotte tried to help, but her legs buckled, slightly as she stood. He moved toward her, steadying her elbow with rough, careful hands. "Easy," he said. "I can manage," she insisted, though her voice trembled. "I didn't say you couldn't," he replied, "just said easy." She allowed him to guide her back to the chair, frustration flashing in her eyes. "It's not my first time being rescued, you know," she said. "Doesn't make it easier," he said simply, setting another log on the fire. That quiet practicality, that unflinching calm, both annoyed and comforted her. She wasn't used to men who spoke without trying to impress. When evening came, the storm grew cruel again, hurling snow against the windows until the glass shuddered. Ethan checked the radio. Still dead static. "We're cut off for a while," he said. "You'll have to make peace with it." Charlotte gave a faint smile. "I've been trying to make peace with a lot of things lately." "Then this place might help," he said. She glanced around the cabin. The walls were lined with shelves of books, military manuals, woodworking guides, a few old novels with frayed spines. Tools hung neatly on hooks, each one oiled and clean. Everything about the space spoke of order, of someone who survived by keeping the world in line. "You built all this yourself?" Ethan nodded. "The house came with the land. Everything else I fixed. That explains a lot." He raised an eyebrow. "About what?" She smiled softly. "About you." Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a small block of wood from the table and began carving, the knife gliding through the grain with precision. Charlotte watched the movements, rhythmic, calm, almost meditative. "What are you making?" she asked. "Don't know yet," he said without looking up. Sometimes you start cutting and it figures itself out." She smiled faintly. "Sounds familiar." The firelight flickered across her face, softening the exhaustion there. She sipped her coffee again, letting the silence settle between them. After a while, she said quietly, "You don't talk much, do you?" Ethan shook his head. "Talking doesn't change much." Charlotte looked at him for a long time. Maybe not, but sometimes it stops the silence from winning. He paused his carving, eyes meeting hers. There was no challenge in her tone, only truth, the kind that made him uncomfortable. That night, when the wind reached its worst, Charlotte couldn't sleep. She heard the cabin creak with every gust, the wood shifting under the weight of snow. She rose from the couch, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and found Ethan still awake, sitting near the fire with Rex at his feet. "You don't sleep either?" she asked. "Never much did," he said. "War?" He nodded once. "I'm sorry." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "Don't be. Sorry doesn't change what you've seen." She lowered her gaze. "You sound like someone who's seen too much." He gave a dry half-smile. "And you sound like someone running from something." Her hands tightened around the blanket. "Maybe I am." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then he said quietly, "Whatever it is, you can stop running here. For now." She wanted to believe that, to let herself feel safe. But safety was a luxury she hadn't trusted in years. Still, when Rex laid his head on her knee, she smiled faintly and whispered, "Good boy." Ethan stood, adding another log to the fire. "Try to get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's another storm." When she lay down again, she watched him through half-closed eyes, this man of silence and scars, whose kindness came wrapped in distance. And for the first time since fleeing her old life, Charlotte Winslow slept without fear. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Inside, beneath the hum of the fire, two strangers shared the quiet warmth of survival. Unaware that this fragile peace would soon be tested by truths neither was ready to face. For 3 days, the storm refused to let go. The snow swallowed the roads, the forest, the sky. Even the horizon disappeared beneath its endless white. Inside the cabin, time slowed to the rhythm of fire crackling and the quiet creak of wood under frost. Ethan Ward rose early, as always. Routine had kept him alive once, and he didn't know how to live without it. He brewed coffee, chopped wood, checked supplies. His movements were deliberate, economical, each gesture shaped by years of training and discipline. The war had left him with habits he couldn't break, and silences he couldn't fill. Charlotte Winslow watched him from the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair, once perfectly arranged, now fell loosely around her face. The color had returned to her cheeks, and though exhaustion still lingered, she looked more alive than she had the night he'd found her. Rex, the German shepherd, lay between them, his tail sweeping the floor with lazy approval. The dog had taken a liking to her, something Ethan found curious. Rex didn't trust easily. Maybe he sensed something in Charlotte's quiet grace, or maybe he simply recognized another wounded soul. That morning, Ethan worked at his workbench by the window, repairing what was left of her wheelchair. The front wheel had cracked from the crash, the metal frame bent out of line. With the precision of a craftsman, he realigned the axle, soldered a brace, and tightened each bolt until it gleamed. Charlotte rolled herself closer, careful not to disturb him. "You know," she said softly, "most people would have tossed that thing out." He didn't look up. "Most people don't live an hour from town. We fix things here." Her smile was faint. "You're good with your hands." He glanced over then, catching the amused glint in her eyes. For the first time, something almost like a smile tugged at his own. "Old habits," he said. "In the army, you learn quick. Fix what's broken, or you don't make it." "What did you fix there?" she asked gently. He hesitated, eyes darkening. "People," he said at last, or tried to. The air between them stilled. She sensed the weight of memory behind those words and didn't press further. Instead, she looked around the cabin. It was small but warm, every corner telling a story. Shelves stacked with tools and jars of nails, a map of Montana pinned above the desk, an old photograph of a unit of soldiers tucked in a wooden frame. "That's your team?" she asked. Ethan's gaze followed hers. "Yeah, the one man in the middle. Nathan Rourke. He was my sergeant." She studied the photograph. "You still talk to him?" "He didn't make it home," Ethan said simply. Charlotte lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but his voice softened. "He made sure I did. That's the kind of man he was." The fire crackled behind them. Outside, snow fell soundlessly, thick, heavy flakes that blurred the trees into pale ghosts. By evening, the storm howled again. The cabin shuddered, wind whistling through the eaves. Ethan brought out 2 tin bowls of stew, the scent of herbs and venison filling the air. Charlotte took hers carefully, the steam warming her hands. "I can't remember the last time I had a real meal," she said with a soft laugh. "Then you've been eating at the wrong places," he replied. She smiled at that, genuinely this time. "You surprise me, Mr. Ward." "Most people stop calling me that after a few days." "And what do they call you instead?" He hesitated. "Usually nothing. I don't let them get close enough." Charlotte looked into his eyes, steady, guarded, but not unkind. "Then maybe that's what needs fixing," she said gently. He didn't answer, but something in his jaw tightened. He rose, fed the fire, and sat back down opposite her. For a long while they ate in silence. Later that night, when she thought he'd gone to sleep, Charlotte found him at his workbench again. The light from the lamp haloed him in gold, his broad shoulders hunched as he carved something small from a block of cedar. She approached quietly. "Can't sleep?" He didn't look up. "Never much could." "What are you making?" He brushed the shavings aside and turned the piece toward her. It was a small wooden box, simple but beautiful, with smooth edges and careful symmetry. "For you," he said, "to keep something in. A letter, maybe. Or a lie you're tired of carrying." She stared at him, surprised. "Why would you think I have one?" Ethan met her gaze. "Everyone does." He handed her the box. Across the lid, in clean, sharp letters, he'd carved one word: hope. Charlotte traced the carving with her fingers. The grain was warm beneath her touch. "Why this word?" "Because it's the one I keep trying to believe in," he said quietly. Something inside her shifted then. Something fragile, but alive. She had spent months pretending, building walls of charm and wealth and polite deceit. But here, in this cabin, with this soldier who spoke little and judged less, those walls began to crack. She closed the box, holding it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan gave a small nod, already turning back to his work. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, if the road clears, I'll drive you to town." Charlotte hesitated. "Do you want me to leave?" He froze, the knife pausing mid-cut. "That's not my choice." "But it is," she said softly. "You saved my life." He turned then, his face shadowed by the firelight. "I just pulled you out of a car. The rest, that's on you." For a moment she wanted to argue, to tell him that no one had ever cared enough to pull her from anything. But she stopped herself. The storm outside howled, and she realized it wasn't the only one. There was another, quieter, colder, still raging inside her. When she finally went to bed, the small box rested on the table beside her. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint smell of cedar and smoke filling the room. Through the thin wall, she heard Ethan's low murmur to Rex, words too soft to make out, but heavy with the tone of someone who'd learned to speak only to those who couldn't answer. Before sleep took her, Charlotte whispered into the darkness, "Maybe hope is enough for now." Outside, the storm began to fade, not gone, just gentler, as though even the wind had paused to listen. The storm ended as quietly as it had come. By morning, the world lay still and silver, the sun glinting off miles of untouched snow. From the window, Ethan Ward watched the forest breathe again, pines heavy with frost, smoke rising from the cabin's chimney in slow, lazy curls. It should have been a peaceful sight, yet something in the silence felt uneasy. Inside, the cabin carried the scent of coffee and cedar. Charlotte Winslow sat by the window, wrapped in Ethan's flannel shirt over her faded dress. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands catching the sunlight like threads of gold. She was sketching on a torn scrap of paper, rough outlines of the cabin, the fireplace. Rex curled on the rug. But her hand trembled, and every few moments she'd glance toward Ethan as if she were waiting for something inevitable. Ethan stepped back from the window, his boots crunching softly on the wooden floor. "Looks like the road might clear by tomorrow," he said, voice quiet but steady. Charlotte nodded without looking up. "You'll take me back to town then?" "If that's what you want." "It isn't," she said quickly, then softer. "But maybe it's what's right." Ethan studied her a long moment. Right can mean a lot of things. The air between them felt different that morning. Heavier, fragile in a way that warned of change. Rex sensed it too. The German shepherd rose, stretching, then settled closer to Charlotte's chair, as if to stand between them. When Ethan moved toward the workbench, she called his name. "Ethan?" He turned. Charlotte's voice shook. "There's something I haven't told you." He didn't answer, just waited. The soldier's patience, calm and unnerving. She looked down at her legs, her hands twisting together. "You remember when I said I couldn't walk properly, that I needed the wheelchair?" He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "It isn't true. Not anymore," she whispered. I used to be paralyzed for months after my accident, but I recovered completely." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you've been pretending?" Her eyes filled with shame. "Not to hurt you, She swallowed hard. "People treat me differently when they know. They pity me or they see me as broken. I wanted to know what it felt like to be seen, as someone whole." For a moment Ethan said nothing. The fire cracked softly between them. Then, in a tone almost too calm, he said, "You didn't need to lie for that." Charlotte's voice broke. "You don't understand. I've lived in a world where everyone lies. My family, my fiancé, even me. I thought if I started over as someone weaker, I'd find someone who stayed for the right reason." Ethan's eyes were fixed on the floor. "And did you?" She stepped closer. "I thought I did. Until now." Rex rose suddenly, tail lowering, as if reading the tension. The air inside the small room thickened. Ethan turned away, his voice rough. "You think I care whether you can walk or not? You could crawl out of here, and it wouldn't change what I did. What matters is that you thought I couldn't handle the truth." "I was afraid," Charlotte whispered. "I didn't want you to see me the way he did, as someone who needed fixing." Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. "You think I fix people? I fix things. Wood, metal, walls that break under storms. Not people. I learned that lesson already." She flinched at the sharpness in his tone. For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, a raven called from the trees, the sound cutting clean through the still air. Finally, Ethan said quietly, "The truth isn't what breaks people, Charlotte. It's the things they hide behind it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then tell me what I can do." "Nothing," he said simply. "Tomorrow the road will clear. You can go wherever you need to." She took a step toward him, but he turned away. The distance between them, barely a few feet, felt like miles. Rex moved to her side, pressing his head gently against her knee, a silent comfort she didn't deserve. That night the cabin felt colder despite the fire. Ethan sat outside on the porch steps, cigarette smoke curling into the freezing air. The stars hung bright above the mountains, but he didn't look at them. His mind wandered to his old unit, to Sergeant Rourke, who used to say, "Truth saves lives, Ward, even when it hurts." Inside, Charlotte sat by the fire, staring at the small wooden box he had carved for her, Hope. She ran her fingers over the word until the edges felt sharp. Tears slipped down her face, silent and hot. She wanted to tell him everything, about the fiancé who left when her legs stopped working, about the family that treated her healing as an inconvenience, about the loneliness that had driven her to run. But words felt useless now. She had broken something that couldn't be glued back together with apologies. Rex eventually came to lie beside her, his head heavy on her lap. She stroked his fur and whispered, "He won't forgive me, will he?" The dog gave no answer, just a low sigh, some sound of loyalty that belonged to both of them and neither. Outside, Ethan crushed his cigarette in the snow, watching the ember die. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe in something again. But belief was a dangerous thing. It always came with a cost. When he finally came inside, Charlotte was asleep in the chair, tear tracks dried against her skin, the box still clutched in her hands. He stood there for a long moment, looking at her, before pulling a blanket over her shoulders. Then, almost in a whisper meant for no one but himself, he said, "Tomorrow she goes." But even as he turned away, Rex lifted his head, watching him with eyes that seemed to know better, eyes that said some things were never that. Simple. The next morning dawned gray and brittle. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a silence so heavy that even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Ward was already outside splitting wood when he heard the low growl from Rex. The dog stood at the edge of the porch, hackles raised, gaze fixed on the narrow road that cut through the trees. A dark vehicle crawled into view, sleek, black, and far too polished for these roads. Tires crunched over ice until it stopped a few yards from the cabin. Ethan set the axe down, muscles tensing as a man stepped out. He was tall, clean-shaven, and sharply dressed in a tailored coat that looked absurd against the wilderness. His boots sank slightly into the snow, yet his posture remained impeccable, as if refusing to bow to nature itself. "Ethan Ward?" the stranger called, his voice smooth and clipped, the kind that belonged in boardrooms, not mountains. Ethan didn't move. "Depends who's asking." The man's eyes flicked toward the cabin door. "Grady Hamilton. I'm looking for Charlotte Winslow." At the sound of that name, Ethan's jaw hardened. He wiped his hands on his jacket and said flatly, "You just found the wrong place to look." Before Grady could reply, the cabin door opened. Charlotte Winslow appeared on the threshold, pale but composed, her hair falling loose around her face. For a moment, the only sound was the faint whine of wind through the pines. "Grady," she breathed, her voice breaking on his name. He gave a thin, almost theatrical smile. "There you are. Do you have any idea what kind of chaos you've caused?" Charlotte gripped the doorframe, her body tense. "How did you find me?" "Your credit card," he said simply, "and a very expensive detective." His gaze swept over the cabin with quiet disdain. "I can see why you didn't want anyone to find you. Picturesque, in a tragic sort of way." Ethan stepped forward, voice low. "You should leave." Grady turned toward him, his expression twisting into polite contempt. And you must be the hero who dragged her off the road. I'd thank you, but she's already taken enough pity from strangers." "Enough," Charlotte said sharply. "You don't get to speak for me any more." Grady's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I think I do. You humiliated my family, Charlotte, walking out on the wedding, leaving me to explain to guests, reporters." "Explain what?" she interrupted, trembling. "That you ran the moment you learned I couldn't walk? That you called off the ceremony through your assistant?" Grady's smirk faltered. "You were never ready, and you know it. You wanted attention, sympathy." Ethan's voice cut through like a blade. "She wanted honesty, something you clearly can't afford." For a moment, the two men locked eyes. Grady's polished confidence flickered into something harder. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he hissed. Ethan's tone didn't rise. "I don't care who you are. You're on my land. Leave." Grady took a slow step forward, lowering his voice. "Do you really think she's staying? Look at her. She runs, that's what she does. And when she's done using you to feel better about herself, she'll run again." Charlotte flinched as if struck. Ethan said nothing, his face unreadable. "Go back to your car," he said at last. Grady laughed under his breath. "Fine. Keep her, if that's what you think you're doing. Just remember, you can't save what doesn't want to be saved." He turned sharply, his coat flaring behind him as he strode back to the SUV. The engine roared to life, sending a spray of slush over the snow before it vanished down the road. The silence that followed was worse than the storm. Charlotte stood frozen on the porch, staring at the tracks disappearing into the trees. "I didn't know he'd come," she whispered. "I never wanted," Ethan interrupted quietly. "He's gone." But his tone carried no relief, only weariness. Charlotte turned to him, tears trembling at the edge of her lashes. "Ethan, please, I didn't ask him to come here. He raised a hand, stopping her. "You don't owe me explanations." "I want to explain," she said, voice shaking. "He wasn't lying about everything. I did run away. Not because of him, but because I couldn't stand what I became. The pity, the cameras, the whispers. I thought if I left it all behind, maybe I could start over. Maybe I could find someone who saw me. Not what I'd lost." Ethan looked past her toward the mountains. "And did you?" Her breath caught. "I thought I did." He didn't answer. He turned back to the woodpile, picking up the axe again as if the conversation were finished. The sound of metal striking wood echoed through the clearing. Sharp, rhythmic, final. Charlotte watched him in silence. Each swing felt like a wall rising between them. When he finally stopped, his voice came low, almost to himself. "Men like him, they leave scars you can't see, but lies, they cut deeper." She stepped down from the porch, snow crunching under her boots. "Then let me prove I'm not a lie." He looked at her, truly looked. And for a brief second the anger faded, replaced by something softer, pained. "Charlotte, you don't need to prove anything," he said. "You just need to be honest, with yourself first." Her lips parted, but no words came. Ethan turned back toward the cabin. Rex, inside. The dog hesitated, glancing between them before obeying. Charlotte followed with slow steps, her heart heavy. Inside, the warmth of the fire felt cruel against the chill that had settled in her chest. That night, Ethan barely spoke. He sat near the stove, whittling aimlessly at a piece of pine, the shavings collecting like fallen snow. Charlotte watched him from the corner of the Shiyod room, every flicker of his knife carving away the fragile thread between them. When she finally went to her room, she paused at the doorway. "Ethan," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Get some rest." She lingered another moment, then whispered, "Thank you for saving me, even if you regret it now." Ethan's knife paused mid-cut, but he didn't speak. She turned away, her footsteps fading into the quiet. When the door closed, he exhaled a long, weary breath. Rex padded over, resting his head against Ethan's knee. "I know," Ethan murmured, rubbing the dog's ear. "I shouldn't care." But the truth, the one he wouldn't admit, was that he did, more than he wanted to. Outside, the tire tracks of Grady Hamilton's car were already filling with new snow, vanishing under the cold, white weight of forgiveness the world wasn't ready to offer. The morning after Grady's visit, the world seemed too still. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold remained, sharp, clean, merciless. Inside the cabin, Charlotte Winslow moved quietly, her face pale beneath the dim amber light of the stove. Every sound, the creak of wood, the clink of a mug, felt like it echoed too loud in the silence Ethan Ward had built between them. He sat at the table, sanding a plank of pine until the grain gleamed smooth under his calloused hands. He hadn't spoken much since yesterday. Rex, lying near the fire, watched them both in silence, eyes shifting between the woman who wanted to stay and the man who'd already begun to let her go. Charlotte wanted to speak, to explain again, but every word she rehearsed died before reaching her lips. Ethan's quiet was not anger. It was something worse. It was distance. By afternoon, she stood at the window, watching sunlight glance off the snow. The mountains stretched far and endless. And for the first time, she realized how easy it would be to vanish here, to live where no one asked questions, where no one remembered the person she used to be. "Storm's over," Ethan said from behind her. His voice startled her. It was the first thing he'd said all day. "Road's clear now. You can make it to town before dark." She turned, searching his face. "You really want me to leave?" He didn't look at her. "Doesn't matter what I want." "Then what do you need?" she asked softly. Ethan paused as though the question had caught him off guard. His hand stilled on the wood, the chain dust clinging to his knuckles. "I need to stop fixing things that aren't mine to fix." That sentence hit harder than any anger. Charlotte swallowed, her throat tight. "I never asked you to fix me." He finally looked at her then, his eyes calm but tired. "No, but I tried anyway." There was nothing left to say. He turned away, and the silence that followed felt like a goodbye neither of them could voice. That night, while Ethan slept in the workshop, Charlotte sat by the firelight, writing by hand on a torn page from one of his old notebooks. Her fingers shook, but her words came steady. "Ethan, you saved me twice, once from the snow and once from myself. I can't stay, not yet. There are pieces of my old life I still need to face. My father's illness, the company I ran from, the people I left without answers. I can't start over until I finish what I ran from. When I come back, I want to look you in the eye and have nothing left to hide. You taught me that truth isn't what hurts, it's what heals. Thank you for giving me that, Charlotte." She folded the letter and slid it into a small wooden box, the one he'd carved for her, the one marked Hope. Then she set it gently on the table beside his cup, weighting it with a single pine cone from the shelf. As dawn crept over the ridges, Charlotte stepped out into what? The cold. She wore Ethan's old flannel shirt beneath her coat, its fabric frayed but warm. The air smelled of smoke and cedar, the faintest trace of his world she'd be leaving behind. Rex followed her to the porch, ears pricked, tail low. She crouched beside him, pressing her forehead to his. "Take care of him," she whispered. "He needs someone who listens." The dog whined softly, as if understanding. Charlotte walked down the snow-covered path, her boots crunching softly in the stillness. She didn't look back. The forest swallowed her shape long before the engine of her borrowed car started. When Ethan woke, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The second was the box on the table. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender and smoke. He opened the lid and found the letter folded neatly inside. He read it once, then again, slower. The words sank like stones in deep water. By the time he finished, his hands had stilled, but his heart hadn't. Rex sat by the door, gaze fixed on the empty trail beyond the window. "She's gone," Ethan said quietly. The words felt both heavy and hollow. He rubbed the dog's head. "Guess we both knew she would be." Rex gave a soft, uncertain whine. Ethan walked to the doorway, watching the faint trail of tire marks fade into the horizon. The mountains stretched far and indifferent, the same as always. Beautiful, merciless, eternal. He held the box in his hand, thumb brushing the carved word, hope. After a moment, he placed it back on the table beside the pine cone she'd left behind. "She went to finish something," he murmured, "not to leave." Rex wagged his tail once, as if agreeing. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow, thin flakes drifting through the morning light. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching the world rebuild itself layer by layer. The storm had ended, yes, but somehow the silence it left behind didn't feel empty anymore. He picked up his coat, stepped outside, and whispered into the cold, "She'll be back." And for the first time in years, Ethan Ward believed the words he said. 2 months passed before the first signs of spring crept through the mountains. The snow receded from the pines, leaving behind patches of wet earth and moss the color of old jade. The river thawed slowly, its ice cracking like distant thunder in the afternoons. Ethan Ward had returned to his rhythm: dawn work, silent meals, long hours in the workshop. Only the faint scent of lavender, sometimes caught in the old flannel shirt, reminded him she had been there. He never moved the wooden box she'd left on the table. Hope sat exactly where she'd placed it, next to the pine cone, like a small monument to something unfinished. Rex still watched the road every morning, as if expecting a familiar figure to appear. Ethan told himself it was just habit, but deep down he found his gaze drawn to the same empty stretch of trail. Life had a way of mending quietly. Orders from town trickled in again. He rebuilt fences, sanded tabletops, oiled the old rifle that leaned by the door. Yet no matter how much the days filled, there was always a space untouched, a silence that waited. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and gold spilled across the clearing, the distant growl of an engine reached his ears. Ethan froze mid-stroke on a plank of cedar. Rex's ears pricked up, tail wagging cautiously. A white SUV appeared beyond the tree line, slow and hesitant, its tires crunching on the thawing path. Ethan set the tool aside, heart thudding with a rhythm he hadn't felt in months. The door opened, and Charlotte Winslow stepped out. She was not the woman he had found in the snow. Her hair was shorter now, brushed to her shoulders, her skin touched by color. She wore a plain wool coat and dark jeans, simple boots scuffed from travel. Gone were the silk and lace, the polished mask. What remained was something steadier, a woman rebuilt from truth. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them shimmered with the weight of everything unsaid. "You found your way back," Ethan said finally, his voice rough from disuse. Charlotte smiled faintly. "I promised I would." She held out an envelope, creased from the road. "And I brought this." Ethan took it without looking down. "What is it?" "Closure," she said. "My family's company, my father's estate. It's all settled. And the cabin loan, it's paid off, in your name." He frowned. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she interrupted gently, "not to repay you, to give you what you gave me, freedom." He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "You're not here because you feel guilty?" Charlotte shook her head. "No, I'm here because I'm done running." The words carried no tremor, no plea, just truth. Ethan's jaw flexed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then don't run any more." She stepped closer, the fading sun painting her face in gold and amber. "If I stay," she whispered, "I need to know this isn't charity." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "It's not. It's home." Rex barked once, breaking the silence. Charlotte laughed softly, a sound he hadn't realized he missed until now. She crouched, wrapping her arms around the dog, who licked her face as if to erase the time she'd been gone. Inside, the cabin hadn't changed much. She noticed the box still resting on the table, exactly where she'd left it. Next to it was something new, a second, smaller box carved from darker wood. On its lid was a single word: trust. Charlotte traced the letters, her eyes glistening. "You kept it." Ethan nodded. Didn't seem right to throw it away. It was waiting for its match. She looked up at him. "And this one?" "Yours," he said simply. "I carved it the week after you left. Didn't know if you'd ever come back, but I figured if you did, you should have both." She smiled through tears. "Then let's finish the set." That evening they worked side by side on the porch. The air smelled of thawing pine and wood smoke. Ethan planed the surface of a broad oak plank while Charlotte sanded the edges. When it was done, they set the board across 2 sawhorses and together carved a final word into its center: home. 3 words now defined everything they had endured: hope, trust, home. As twilight fell, they lit the lantern and sat beside each other on the porch. Rex lay between them, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. The mountains glowed under the last light, and a warm breeze carried the scent of melting snow. Charlotte turned to him. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think hope was something people found in each other. Now I think it's something they build." Ethan smiled, eyes on the horizon. "Then I guess we're builders." She laughed, quiet, content. Maybe that's all love is. 2 people building the same thing and not giving up halfway. He looked at her, and for the first time since the war, Ethan Ward felt peace. Not the fragile kind born from silence, but the real kind, built from scars and second chances. Rex lifted his head as if sensing something change, then settled again with a sigh. The lantern flickered once, its glow soft against their faces. Charlotte leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. "So," she murmured, "what do we build next?" He took her hand, calloused fingers closing gently around hers. "Whatever lasts." Above them the stars broke through the fading sky, cold and endless, yet somehow kind. The mountains, the river, the cabin, all breathed together in quiet harmony. The storm had long passed, but its memory remained, not as pain, but as proof. And in that stillness, under the wide Montana sky, the light stayed. Final message: the light that stayed. In every storm of life there comes a moment when the noise fades and only silence remains. That silence, the one Ethan and Charlotte found, is where God often whispers. His miracles rarely arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they appear in the quiet, in a stranger's kindness, in forgiveness that feels impossible, or in the courage to start again. This story isn't only about 2 lost souls finding home. It's about how grace finds us when we think we're beyond saving. It reminds us that God doesn't always calm the storm. Sometimes He calms His child within it. So tonight, if you feel burdened, if the snow of your own struggles feels too deep to wade through, remember, there's light waiting beyond it. The same light that guided Ethan and Charlotte through loss, through fear, through doubt. It shines for you, too. have faith. Keep building hope, trust, and home wherever you are. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles still happen in quiet places. Leave a comment about what hope means to you, and let's build a little corner of warmth together right here. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of redemption, love, and the gentle miracles of everyday life. May God bless you, and may His light stay with you through every storm.